On this episode of A State of Control, we talk about how do you take your systems to the next level? What are some features and functionality that programming can provide? And how do we use modern programming languages to be able to make that happen? All that and more on A State of Control.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
A State of Control.
A State of Control, episode 64, Data and Sharing.
Support for AVNation is brought to you by
Extron, industry-leading technology backed by world-class support.
Welcome to A State of Control, an AVNation podcast that highlights the control, programming, and automation aspects of the audiovisual industry. My name is Steve Greenblatt. I'm your host. Thanks for joining us today. So on today's show, we're going to talk a little bit about the possibilities and the capabilities of custom programming and what programming can do to make systems more capable, more intelligent, and more valuable to clients. With me to discuss this topic are some returning guests that I think can certainly shed some light on it. But first, I'd like to send well wishes out to my partner, Rich Fregosa. He's under the weather today and we miss him, but we'll see him again on the next show and hope he gets well soon. First, I'd like to start with Brian McGrogan from Verex. He's a veteran control system programmer who I know from some time, and welcome, Brian.
Thanks for having me again, Steve.
Thank you. And next is Peter Knapp from Extron Electronics. Know Peter for some time as well, and he does a lot of focus on the control system offerings at Extron. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you, Steve. Glad to be here.
Thanks for being here. So, we talk a lot about how systems are becoming simpler and how programming is less programming is required, but yet there's a lot of products out there and there's a lot of changes even on the consumer side of electronics and AV that are really pushing the ideas about how we can make our systems in Pro AV a lot more intelligent and a lot more capable. So let's talk a little bit about that. So Brian, I'll start with you. When we look at a project now, and we've come some way. We've been doing programming and control for some time, and we've kind of shifted a bit to automation. What are some of the newer ideas that you are talking to clients about in terms of what you can provide in a program system?
I think one of the things that we have to talk about all the time is really sometimes less interaction with the system, being more predictive and just sensing sync, plugging in, TV comes on, everything's there, or even walk in the room, TV comes on, meeting information is up, some sort of welcoming to the room to make it feel a little more warm and fuzzy as you come in with instructions of, if you'd like to plug in, the cable is at the table. If you'd like to connect wirelessly, here's how you do it. And being a value add there. So ensuring that all those pieces talk together and make it as seamless and as easy as possible for somebody to use the system.
So, Pete, Extron is obviously a manufacturer of not only controls, but other products. And I'm sure, as Brian talks about, the ability to make equipment work together seamlessly is probably a big focus. When you're talking to clients about your control solution, how much of that is about trying to keep them working with products that or giving them the opportunity to bring different components in so how much of it is keeping them in a safe zone versus trying to provide them a solution that can encompass whatever they dream up?
Well, the first things we always talk about are what are their needs of the systems. What are the experience levels of the users of the systems? And how can either products that Extron makes or products that Extron integrates with from other manufacturers, how can all these things tie together to form a system that provides a value to the customer? If it's not a value, how is it really beneficial to them? And just because systems appear to be simple doesn't necessarily mean that they're more simple to configure or program. There are some configured systems that are extremely capable in what they can do. As Brian had mentioned, the idea of walking into a room, an occupancy sensor triggers the display to turn on, or even more so, as he said, you plug in your laptop or other type of device into a connector that's on the table. The switcher senses the sync. That tells the control system, tell the display to do something, and turns the system on. So it's more things with less. In a lot of cases, there are times where you can make a system that doesn't actually require a person to touch a button, whether it's on a button panel or whether it's on a touch panel. And that's all done through the configuration capability or the programming capability of the system, depending upon what's there and depending upon the method by which it's best to make the system work.
So Brian, let's explore that a little bit. Are we then kind of telling people how systems should work by doing something like that, rather than giving them the opportunity to interact with it the way they want? And is it always kind of one or the other?
Well, so I want to touch back on what Peter said in terms of kind of interviewing the people and understanding their needs, right? It almost always comes back to that. I don't like to be the person that makes that decision because I don't necessarily know what's best for their users. I have a ton of experience and I can tell you in my experience XYZ happens, but you might have a group of users that feel 100% differently about it. And then the challenge also becomes when you get a whole bunch of different personalities that feel a whole bunch of different ways in that we have to come back and circle back to that initial interview with people and then to follow up. So I always feel like that is the most important part. And I think unfortunately our industry, it doesn't happen enough, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to move too quickly. We're trying to get things done under really tight timelines. And in the end, sometimes we end up going back and we miss those deadlines, or we end up going back over and over again because we didn't do that process properly. So it becomes a challenge.
And some of the things that you're explaining resonate, a lot with me. And I'm actually involved in the AVIX's user experience standard, and that's a lot of what we talk about. And that also reflects in software development. Is that's a big thing. And I think the AV world may be treating programming a little bit differently than the rest of the world treats software. So
absolutely,
I think that's a good point.
Yeah.
That requirements document right away, having that, which we generally don't have, is fantastic to work from.
Some of the most advanced things you can do in a control system is the ability to meet the user's need. And sometimes it's a matter of doing it in the manner that they'll use it. Whether it's something that's a slick interface, a great way to make things work, but the nice thing is the consistency that can be done between room to room, building to building, and even across a large enterprise. So that someone, no matter where they're from, what type of enterprise they're used to, they can come into a room anywhere and they see that it works the same way. And the nice thing is when you can marry the appropriate type of programming or configuration to that system based upon the needs of what the user has. In some cases, one may be a better choice than another just because of the time investment into making the system work.
So I'll take that a little bit further, if you go through this needs analysis, which I'm a big believer in, and you sit down with the client and the things that they're looking for kind of go outside of what the realm of what we're used to providing, but rightfully so. So if we're talking about, voice control, we're talking about the predictive functionality and smarter systems. And Pete, I'll kind of follow up with you on this. How do we take the conversation to that next level of saying that it can be done, but what it takes to do it may be two different things?
That's the whole question that I always ask folks is, okay, that can be done, but should it be done? You've got to balance out what I like to refer to in a lot of cases are the edge case. Hey, that's really cool, and can you do this, to where we come in and as soon as someone walks in, all these different things happen. But you realize that was only one person that wanted all these different things happening when you walk into a room without touching a button. And these other people just wanted the display to turn on with a message, as Brian had mentioned, that shows up on the display, which says, please plug in your laptop or BOID device to the connector at the table. It may just be a simplification rather than the advanced feature, but there's advanced programming involved in that to make that all happen together, or advanced configuration to make it all happen together.
Sure. Brian, why don't you chime in? When you're working with a client and when these types of conversations do come up, you also have to consider what it is that they bought, and and how do those conversations evolve for you?
So I think one of the things to go back to Peter for a moment is whenever we have somebody who's kind of driving the process but may not actually be the end user, number one, we try to identify that. They like this really cool, slick thing, but then it doesn't work for 50% of the people. Myself, I always try to make that an advanced option to turn on and turn off when needed, right? So this person comes in the room and loves it, but then we get feedback from 10 other users that, hey, no, I don't like this at all. Okay, no problem. Go switch that off. I don't have to go back and update anything. And if you want to turn it on for a demo, great. Turn it on, then turn it back off, etc. So I think that becomes really a big thing there. One of the other things that can really happen there is, like you said, Steve, you can end up going way over in what was sold versus what you're actually doing, and that's a fine line. I always find myself, and sometimes to a fault, is I want to do it because I want to make the customer happy, and if that means that I'm going to go back to my desk after my kids go to bed and continue to program to try to make all that functionality there, and unfortunately, I bill a lot more hours than the sales guy wanted me to. I want that person to be happy because I want them to come back in the end. Yeah. So, and I also think that we can use things like that and the metrics for that to go back to our designers and our salespeople and show, like, hey, this is what we came up with a requirement, and this is what it actually took to make it happen, and this is why. So I really try to take a lot of notes about that so that, when I have that meeting afterwards, I can bring that up and explain that. And hopefully next time it makes it easier for everybody. Cross your fingers.
Yeah.
So let's look at this from another angle. If we are not necessarily, and I think you bring up a good point too, Brian, about being able to turn on and off and make adjustments, because that's an important thing, because what somebody says that they may want when they actually get it may be two different things. But Pete, when we're talking to, if we were able to eliminate some of these constraints, how do we start to take our systems to the next level? Because I think that there's a lot of pressure or a lot of focus being put on the value of programming and how, whether the cost or how much time or the complexity of it. How do we start to raise our game a little bit and say, okay, programming is where it's at, and this is what you should be leading with in terms of being able to address needs and wow clients?
Sure. Well, I actually think that you're on the right path, but I think it's a twofold path there, Steve. There's a lot of systems that advanced configuration may fit. But there's a lot of other systems where you really do need to put in a truly programmable system. I'm real familiar with the Extron programmable systems, the Python language. And one of the nicest things there is that there are so many libraries available that we can pull from and bring into the programming system so that we could very easily add features that programmers have requested, whether it's a timing feature, whether it's a feature that pulls more data from other things or leverages data coming in from building automation systems or other sensors, or whether it's data coming in from meeting metrics. So we can take all that information together and make smart decisions on the rooms. So, I mean, even little things like this room was scheduled to be in a meeting, but no one showed up for the meeting because the user presence sensors showed that no one was in there. Well, but they already said they wanted the system to turn on before people arrived. How long is that system going to stay on? So using the sensors, we can then make smart decisions as to, okay, no one arrived for this meeting, and the rule was 5 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever the rule set by that corporation or that group, and you turn the systems off. Now, there's other things you can do with that same thing. I've seen in education facilities where, yes, some of the classrooms and meeting rooms are open to the students throughout most of the time of the day. But there are certain times a day where they don't allow the technology to be used. And so they'll shut off technology at certain times of the day. And students are pretty clever at times. They'll stand up on tables and chairs and whatever and disconnect things so they can plug their Xbox into that nice projector that's sitting in the ceiling. But when they disconnect that connector, well, we now see that the system's no longer responding the way that it was previously. It doesn't have the hot plug connect. It doesn't have the response to a query that comes back every once in a while. And so those are the type of things that you can make really smart decisions on and make changes to the system. Or even things like notifying someone that an anomalous condition has occurred in classroom 6 or whatever the case may be. All done by programming, and those can be sent by email messages, Twitter messages, even instant messaging, to get it to the right person at the right time. And so we're making things smart by leveraging other systems and other tools, whether it's something that goes back to a network-based SNMP management tool, or whether it's something simple as a email message or a instant message sent out to a group of people.
And forgive me, I certainly don't discount configuration, and we talk about that a lot on the show. We've definitely appreciated the value of it, and I have personally, and I think that we've also explored it. So when I say programming, it's more of just trying to look at it holistically. Mm-hmm. So Brian, kind of going to where Pete talked about Python, and we've talked about some other modern programming languages. Is that really where it's at in order to step up our game here, or and is it something that we are going to be developing as an AV industry, or are we also going to be relying on other software developers to help us bring in other either other systems or other capabilities and to make systems higher level and more robust?
I do think that the newer programming languages, Python, C#, etc., are really where it's going to be at. I do think for those basic systems, sometimes using older languages is fine. We would prefer not to. But I do actually like your point, Steve, about bringing in outside parties in certain cases to help that integration path, especially, like a smaller programming house that may not have the resources to invest in that development. Maybe we can bury a little bit of it in a project, but we don't have that initial resource to get going. It, can be a great tool to say, hey, here's my requirements, can you help us get our library going? Can you help, do that? Which is really, with the more advanced programming languages, opened up that whole door. And I think that's a great thing to leverage. I do think that as an industry and as a set of programmers, we need to evolve, or else we're going to find ourselves in the dust.
Agreed.
So, and I think that's going to be a challenge at points. So I know that, lots of manufacturers are pushing us in that direction. I think that, just like in, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, things started to get deprecated, it's going to happen again soon. And so if you don't evolve and if you don't spend the time, even on your own at points to learn, you're going to start to become obsolete as well.
So you mentioned this once earlier, and again here, about learning on your own and kind of doing your own R&D so that you have different offerings and different ideas that you can put in front of clients. Is that something that is going to need to be thought about from either integrators or software developers or even looking at it from a manufacturer's standpoint to allow more time either within projects or within a work schedule to be able to do these things in order to bring our systems up?
I do think that really does need to be brought into the equation, back at the manufacturers and back at the integrators and in the programming houses, because sometimes there's just not enough time. There just physically isn't. And while I love what I do, I wouldn't do it outside of work if I didn't. One of my favorite places to test is at home, because I guarantee you, if I put a new piece of code in and there's something wrong with it, my wife will find it, and she will find it when I'm traveling and it's 9 o'clock at night and she's mad that, I broke something. So she's my best tester. But I think that, there's almost no way around it. Some of our own time is going to have to use for that development, but I do think that we need to leverage and put a little more pressure on, hey, we need to make some downtime to work on these things. Yeah. And that is a really hard sell. I don't myself personally know the right way to sell it. I know that we talk about it and it's always something that's in our goals, but it does seem like it gets pushed all the way to the back burner every year.
Some of the other things, Steve, that I think might be helpful would be sharing of this innovation. Ways that we can share information between, hey, this is an interesting idea that this person came up with, and we sat around at a classroom table or sat around over lunch someday and came up with these ideas and said, well, I've already tried that with this language, or I've already done that with this, or we've done these types of things. And so those are ways that we can share this information. And as Brian mentioned, these new or more mainline programming languages allow us these type of sharing tools, to where we found manufacturers that are also programming and doing other things in the same language as we are. And so therefore it's easy to take their capabilities and their innovation and their knowledge on how their systems work and leverage that into making the other parts of the control system and other parts of the AV system work better, because they know their hardware better than we do.
So I know, Pete, and I think you bring up a really great point, and I think it starts to make me think about community and and how and the whole open source type concept and ways of being able to work collaboratively. You're involved, and Extron is very well known for training. Is this something that you think we'll see in the AV industry, that there's going to be more collaborative type training and possibly even cross-platform?
Hey, do you happen to have one of your programmers in the office that could join us on the call? We actually have a forum that we put together specifically for the programmers at Extron, and it is open to the Extron authorized programmers. And we share a lot of code. We share a lot of things that are there. There's a lot of ideas that are proffered there, not only just by Extron, but by the programmers. In fact, the reason I asked that of Steve was he's got some programmers on staff that are frequent contributors, not only in ideas, but in thoughts and even questions that bring up other questions. The nice thing is, as a manufacturer, we're not really moderating most of those conversations. Most of the conversations happen in a natural way, and questions go out, answers happen a lot of times even before we see them. And the nice thing is people are sharing, hey, I tried this piece of code and this worked for me. Or I'm trying this and this isn't working the way I thought it would. other person says, hey, we'll try this piece of code. So we're getting a lot of sharing of different ways to do things, which is really nice.
It makes me think, and thank you for that. And I do have some familiarity with what is happening, but I appreciate also, because honestly, I don't know the extent of it, but I know that there's certainly forums that are very valuable and are great ways to be able to problem solve and at least help help get answers to questions. Brian, what this kind of makes me think is, could this end up becoming some type of a way of putting out a need and saying, hey, who's out there that can solve this for me?
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. To follow up on Peter, I use forums all the time, right? And sometimes I even end up on social media in groups that I'm part of. And I wake up in the morning, I see a couple notifications of questions people have asked, or, when people are really great and they love to contribute and say, oh, hey, I ran into this on Thursday and I figured out XYZ to get around it, or, a little bit different way to do that. And I think as an overall community, that really helps all of us. And the people that you get that can contribute are really fantastic. I love to, when I figure out something like that, I love to help people, and hopefully in return, when I have a question, hopefully there's somebody out there that has had that same problem and can contribute as well. So yeah, it really is. It is a community. We all work for different people, but it really does become a community, and we want to help each other out. So I think yes, that can really help and be very valuable.
Without going into specifics that may not be appropriate, is what are some of the platforms that listeners could find these types of groups?
So social media, myself, part of the Facebook groups, and a couple different forums for specific manufacturers. One of the ones that I really enjoyed, where I got very deeply involved, was you mentioned it earlier. We didn't touch on it really yet, but as voice control starts to come in, there are lots of little nuances that everybody learns a different way. And oh, hey, if you say it this way, it gets recognized 95% of the time. But if you say it this way, so now it's just a learning thing. So that was one of the ones that was really very helpful.
And there are several forums like that on both major, or all three major manufacturers of voice interactive clients that discuss the best ways to interact, best ways to talk with their systems. And even in some cases, little snippets of code in many different languages that can be used. There's some other very wide general ranging forums that can be used specific to, say, the Python language, in addition to the manufacturers forums that are available out there. But to be honest, and a lot of times I'll put up a question and search this question plus Python and plus this, and you'll get, unfortunately, hundreds of data points to search through. I had someone ask, is there a way that I could create an astronomical clock in the system? And we're like, well, yeah, of course there is. We didn't put one in because there's these other libraries out there that have these things in it. And within a few minutes of searching, we're able to find the exact tool that this person was looking for. Did the job that he needed, and everything worked just perfect because it was available from other people that have tested, verified, and made certain that the code worked.
And I think, Peter, you bring up a good point there, right? Steve, from earlier, as we leverage the newer languages and the more open source languages, it becomes a lot easier to type in a search engine and say, oh, hey, I need to do XYZ in C# or in Python, etc. And here you go. Like you said, Peter, sometimes you have to weed through them, but here's 100 different examples. Oh, I'm going to figure it out, whether it be merging a couple or, oh, this is the one that works perfectly for me.
Right.
So as we wrap up, and this has been a great conversation, I'll give you both a similar question and a chance to kind of share what thoughts do you have on the direction that you see AV systems moving in the future. What are some of the cool ideas either that you've talked about or been requested that you see maybe becoming more of a reality in the future? Brian, I'll start with you.
So I think that voice is really going to become big. I think there's a place for it, right? And there's a certain client for it. But I do think as that creeps more and more, it's already a lot in our home, but more and more into our lives, we're going to expect it everywhere. There are obviously certain security implications, et cetera, that we have to be very careful about. But I think that's really a game changer. And I also think that, like we've talked about throughout our conversation, the simpler configurable systems, those really help push us as well to make that more streamlined user interface that will work for a more complex system that does require programming, but to help keep that user experience, like Peter mentioned, the same across an entire organization.
So Peter, whether it's something that Extron will be doing, or whether it's something that you feel you're seeing trends, where do you see what capabilities do you see being in our future?
Well, the things that I see a lot happening now, and I know it's going to just continue to grow, is the ability to share information between, say, a control system, which at one point was just this own island that did its own thing. It had its own buttons, its own touch panel, even in some cases, its own network. But now it's sharing data. And data is the key. And if that data can be used to present that, hey, this room is being used for these systems, for these type of things at these type of times, it can make the decision more intelligent that we need more of these types of rooms, or this other room isn't being used. Figure out why, or perhaps we thought that this type of device was necessary in this room, but that device hasn't been used in 3 months. So data is the thing that I think is more important at this point. And a lot of times, even sharing data from the AV system outward, but other ways, taking data from other systems, bringing it into the AV system to make that make it smarter. Wow. And even
it can be more smarter.
Well, even more smarter than smarter. Yeah. And make it predictive to where when the user comes in and he's done a web request for that room or an email using his Outlook client or whatever to schedule that room, they said, oh, not only do I want this room, but I want this room to do this, make this phone call, make this all these systems be ready. And then when you come in, the user just comes in and doesn't actually touch a button on the system. I love touch panels. I program them all the time. But maybe it's kind of cool that systems don't always need the touch panel to make the system work.
Well, I think that's a good way of putting a bow on this. And then this has been a very enriching conversation, and I appreciate both of your insight. First, Brian, thanks for being a part of the show. How can people get in touch with you, learn more about what you're up to, and also get in touch with Verex?
Well, thank you for having me, Steve. It's great to return. I really enjoy the show. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, B. McGrogan, Verex, www.verex.com. I'm always around, always on the forums. So anybody who wants to reach me, please feel free.
Excellent. Peter Knapp from Extron, thank you for joining us. And how can people get in touch with you and learn more about Extron?
Well, there's quite a few different ways to get in touch with me. Probably the easiest would be the Extron website, call our Extron S3 hotline. That number's on the website. Most people know it as it is. Or you can reach me out on email at pnap@extron.com. Be more than happy to answer your questions or get you to someone who can.
I'm sure you'll be able to answer most of them because we've tested you on that. And again, we send well wishes out to Uncle Richie. We hope that he feels better soon and we get to see him on the next show. My name's Steve Greenblatt. As you know, I can be reached at Steve Greenblatt or my company Control Concepts at controlconcepts.net. But most importantly, please visit AVNation.tv. That's AVNation.tv, the website that hosts the show, as well as a bunch of different shows in different parts of the industry, whether it's commercial or residential. And while you're at the website, check out the supporters that help to make AVNation happen and help to make this show possible. Until then, I'd like to thank you for joining us, and we'll see you in the next show.